Aren't we all secretly wondering how some brands become the brand? Spoken about, raved about, and somehow always one step ahead without ever feeling pushy. How do some teams just click while others are caught in endless turf wars between sales, marketing, advocacy, and you say it all? In a world obsessed with leads and logos, what does it really take to build a customer obsessed company from ground up? If those questions keep you up at night or at least pop up into your head mid pipeline review, you are going to want to stick around for this one. You'll love this topic.
I'm Aparna, your host to the Loyalty Talks podcast. In nearly 2 decades of my journey in understanding customer marketing, I'm the strategist who saw advocacy not as a tactic, but as a torch, loyalty as legacy, and customer voices as the loudest currency your brand will ever own. I've built programs that turn users into superfans, reviews into revenue, and just checking in emails into career-defining magic. I speak fluent G2, NPS whispers, referral triggers, and every version of can you share a customer for this slide. If you are in customer marketing or itching to break in, you've just found your people. So whether you're nurturing your first advocate or leading a global reference program, join me and my expert guests as we turn your marketing muscle into movement. No gatekeeping, no fancy jargon, just blueprints, battle scars, and breakthroughs. Let's build the kind of career they said was too niche until it wasn't. Pull up a seat. This is the Loyalty Talks podcast.
Today's guest has built not one, not two, but 3 of the most beloved B2B brands on the planet. And no, he did not make a deal with the marketing gods. He's just one. From leading Zendesk's IPO era glow up to turning Slack into a verb, sprinkling some of that magic onto Salesforce too, Bill Macaitis, founder of SaaS CMO Pro, is the CMO your CMO dreams about. Oh, he's the man who made customer love a legitimate KPI before it was cool, proved the enterprise software doesn't have to be boring, and reminded us that marketing is more than just MQLs. It is about trust, it is about experience, and adding that little fun. So buckle up, because if you've ever wanted to know how to build a billion-dollar brand without selling your soul to jargon, this one's for you. Bill, it is a privilege to have you here, and thanks for doing this podcast as my first guest.
Oh man, you're making me blush. That was quite the intro there. I'm super impressed. Thank you so much for inviting me, and honored to be your first guest.
It's my honor. So without wasting any more time, I would dig right into what I think is the most pressing question that keeps us awake at night: alignment between sales, demand generation, and customer marketing is like that revenue triangle that no one's giving the actual light to. I've personally seen this at a scale from watching sales push hard with quarterly goals while marketing is optimizing MQLs. Customer marketing is usually chasing for customer quote approvals and things like that. But when I've seen it click, when it works, we've pulled in customer insights into nurtured journeys, handed off reference-ready accounts to sales. The pipeline velocity that we've seen has doubled in a quarter at times. What's your take on bringing this revenue Lego together? Like sales, DG, customer marketing. And why is this trio still so underestimated in most growth strategies?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think for most companies and most startups out there, the model's broken. These are 3 siloed teams that don't work together, don't share the same metrics, don't share the same values. And it leads to, predictable outcomes where you don't see the synergy that can come when all 3 are working together. So I think there's a lot of reasons why, and I know we're going to dive into that. Some of it's org structure, some of it's just philosophy on how to build a company. It's something I never quite understood, because even if you're a pure revenue person, if you kind of look at the numbers for SaaS and AI companies, like generally 50% of their revenue is going to come from existing customers. A lot of times, like 95, 98% of the effort, the program dollars, the people power, all goes to net new, right? Net new logo, net new prospects coming in. And I don't know. I've always been just kind of like mystified by that a lot of companies don't kind of recognize the importance of your existing customers. And not only that, but the disjointed experiences that these prospects and customers get when you have these very siloed teams that aren't working together and aren't sharing insights. So definitely agree with you. I think it's a very broken process right now, and there's a lot of areas where it can improve. And I think it looks like we both had some experiences where it has worked together. And when it does work, you can see how powerful it is.
It resonates with me that it is supposed to be a shared value, right? So the other day I was reading, I think it's very recent in the Forrester report that 65% of B2B organization admit that their sales and their marketing teams aren't aligned. So it's just sad because the customer marketing mix, if you add that, I think it's a very poor show. I just want to know from your experience, what are some of those early warning signs that sales, demand gen, customer marketing team aren't really aligned? Like, what tells you that something's really off and it's beyond missed targets?
Yeah, I think we've all seen it. To me, there's some pretty obvious cues. Like one, all these people report into different folks, right? There's it never ladders up into the same person, right? They're all different teams, different departments. If they are working in offices, they don't sit by each other. They're on different floors or different areas. They have completely different metrics, maybe even different values. I know you touched on that at the beginning, but I think that's a really important one. All these things to me are like really easy signals. And I think the end is like the end output. You tend to see slower revenue growth. You tend to see lower word of mouth growth, lower advocacy of the existing customers. I think when orgs are separated metrics, orgs, values wise, you're going to see this natural kind of extension of slower growth. And, and the existing customers feel that, and they don't quite get the same amount of love that, you kind of pollute it with a lot of bad experiences too. That's been my experience when, marketing only cares about leads and sales only cares about closing deals. And it's super short term. You tend to if you're in sales, you tend to promise the world like, oh, our product's amazing. You can walk on water. You can do all this stuff with it. It's great. You're going to have all access to all these features, right? That don't exist. Marketing does another worse experience, which is like we gate everything. Everything's behind a form because we have to get our credit, right, for that lead. And, a lot of times these are the first experiences people have with your startup, with your SaaS or AI company, and they're negative experiences. They're bad experiences. Maybe you're being cold called, you're being harassed, you're whatever it is, you're not looking at the long term. So I think like these short-term metrics, these silo teams can really yield really negative experiences. And ultimately, if you want to grow and you want to grow fast and you want to grow capital efficient, word of mouth is so powerful, right? And you kind of have to take a step back and go like, at least for me, my opinion was always, hey, how do we align these teams together? How do we optimize the experience? How do we optimize the journey? Recognizing it is a journey. How do we choose the right metrics? How do we choose the right values? How do we choose the right culture? How do we choose the right org alignments? Because I think all these things really matter.
True. I feel most of the times, at least in my part of the world, I've seen that the internal meetings itself say it all. Like, you see the disparity between the sales and the marketing, where sales call it, whatever is coming from marketing is all fluff. That's like, and marketing would call sales as spoiled. They don't know what they see. There needs to be a reset button where they understand that even when customer marketing comes in, like if there is a reference call that happens where an existing customer goes and speaks to your potential lead, it's going to make a major impact. Your sales is going to be faster. And I'll give you an example. Previous organization, we had a win and losses meetup each month. And most of the times we would discuss some of the deals that were won. Okay, yes, everyone wants to celebrate that. But what happened to the one that got lost? So it gave a lot of perspective to demand generation on reworking on their targeting. And it gave us a lot of perspective on how we need to pivot our messaging, how and which advocates we need to roll in who take those reference calls where we know it would make an impact. Would you have any of those kind of stories? Like, I want juice. So I would say, like, if you have say any of the stories from, like, let's say Slack, Salesforce, whatever, where aligning these functions led to something productive, something big, like a breakthrough moment.
I would say probably the biggest one for us was when I originally came into Slack. I joined about employee 50, so very early. I came in as a CMO, and pretty quickly, I realized that Stuart and I shared a lot of the same values. So Stuart was one of the founder and CEO. And we really cared about the experience that our customers were having, that our prospects were having, right? A lot of times I remember I was having this conversation with him early on, and his mind kind of worked like he said, like, hey, when you go into a restaurant, it's not just the food. The food's important, but it's like he would always look at, like, okay, like maybe he drove there. Maybe there was a valet. What was that experience? Like when you went
Yeah.
and talked to the host, what was that experience? Were they friendly? Were they helpful? Did they put you in a seat that maybe you had requested or that you liked? How was the lighting, right? Was the air conditioning on too much and you were freezing? When you needed a little bit extra water, did you only have to wait for your server, or did maybe another one come and help you out? All these little micro experiences, I think,
Yeah.
were really powerful. And we both kind of realized that. So again, early on, I kind of built up the marketing team from scratch, but then we were kind of like said, hey, it probably makes sense to have all the customer facing teams under one leader. And so I was, I felt really fortunate. I had an opportunity to kind of lead marketing and sales and success and customer marketing and support, all these teams that had like a lot of these interactions and these experiences that we were giving. And I found, like, I think that was a really big game changer for us at Slack, because we did try to view it as, hey, it was a journey and all these teams had little micro
Yeah.
experiences with it. But how did we think about it holistically? How did we think about the handoffs between marketing and sales? And not only that, but not even just viewing the world as like marketing is just in charge of this one little section and sales is just in charge of this section. But saying, hey, like sales and marketing, we're gonna lifetime. How do we talk and share feedback? And I remember even like customer success, a lot of times, like historically, they would go out and help with implementation, adoption, right? But I would always be like, hey, wherever you're seeing people stumble, let's work with the product team and let's try to like fix it so the product
Yeah.
itself can help onboard. Or sales, Slack, we did a lot of high velocity. We did a lot of like people that could self-serve by. Well, sales was used to talking to people too, and they would kind of figure out, well, what were the natural objections that people were bringing up on why they were nervous about buying Slack or using Slack. Well, let's put that all in a giant fact, like on the self-serve buying page. Or marketing, hey, as opposed to just focusing on top of funnel, let's get into the product itself. Like Slack, I don't think a lot of people know this, like marketing, we spend a lot of our time in the product. So we spend a lot of time on the visual identity. We spend a lot of time in the onboarding flow. We spend a lot of time rewriting all the prompts, putting in Easter eggs, making the product more fun to use, because marketers are kind of good at that stuff. Right? I think too, even the customer marketing team, I think we tried to take a very holistic viewpoint of it. So not just saying, all right, customer marketing, you're just in charge of references or this or that. It was like, hey, customer marketing, you're about the entire journey of the customer. They see the education, the nurturing, making them more successful. You're not just a little sales assistant that goes in there and just tries to help close deals. So I think for us, like when we kind of align those teams all together, I think it allowed for a much more cohesive journey. We saw word of mouth really shoot up. We had a really high net promoter score. We saw all these additional like add-on benefits, and it just was something that was like kind of cool. A lot of times these orgs historically were very siloed, didn't talk to each other. And I kind of saw firsthand when you bring them together and you really incentivize it and focus on the overall journey,
True.
like
Yeah.
how big that can be.
I always feel that collaboration where you have everyone under your wing. You were lucky. I have a very tiny experience, but I've not seen anyone so aligned and so beautifully synced. I've seen leaders want to fixate on there's a misalignment. Let's just bring technology in. Let's have dashboards. Let's have better attribution model. No one actually sits and says let's work together. Right? I think it's a beautiful way to describe that, whatever point of friction is there, you go ahead and address it together. How is it that you can make better use of the customer feedback that unifies this whole trio together, sales, demand generation, and customer marketing? How does that work?
I'm a huge advocate of delivering a great customer journey. I think a lot of times in marketing, we talk about brand, and people might define that as, oh, it's your logo, your slogan. And I always thought the brand was the sum of every single experience that someone had with your company. And it's all these micro experiences. And if you really want to optimize those, you have to measure it, but you also have to like get good feedback loops. You have to be able to take these customer, the feedback, the quotes, whatever they are that they're going through, and like get that back to these teams
Correct.
that are making the impact. So, I mean, some of the ways we tried to operationalize that, when I was at Slack, for instance, we would measure CSAT
Uh-huh.
transactionally. We'd measure NPS. Even the CSAT one, so for instance, like when a salesperson had an engagement with one of our customers, after they had gone through the buying process, we would survey those customers and go like, hey, Natalie was your account executive. How helpful was she?
Hmm. Hmm.
How responsive was she? How knowledgeable was she? How courteous was she? Right? All the values that we really thought were important, that we wanted people to have a good experience with. Because I think we've all had that experience in,
True.
personal lives where we've bought something, but man, it was a crappy experience. It was like, man, that person was just like totally pushing me too hard, and they were just doing all this stuff, and like I didn't like it, and I had to get it anyway. But whether it's a car or just something small, we've all kind of like, I think, gone through that at one point of our lives. So we wanted to have those feedback loops. So, and we'd also allow like open-ended feedback for all those. So we did that for our customer
Uh-huh.
success. We did that a lot on the website. We'd always ask for feedback. We would do it a lot with new users coming in. A lot of
Yeah.
times we give credits out. So we say, hey, you get 100 credits if you can just fill out this quick survey. We did a lot of like NPS survey. I'm a big
Uh-huh.
NPS fan. Go NPS. Net Promoter Score. I'm sure anybody who's listening to this knows it. But, we would always ask the how likely to recommend to a friend or colleague, 1 through 10. But we would also ask the, well, why? Like, why did you give us a 10? Why did you give us a 1, right? And then like we would operationalize that open-ended feedback. And so we had like these big screens all over our office, and you would literally see all the NPS
Amazing.
open-ended feedback going through. People that were on that account, either the account exec or the CSM, would automatically get at mentioned. We had the flow there. We'd have an open channel in Slack where anybody could go in and see every single open-ended feedback. And I think, like you said, it's like you kind of have to create these processes because a lot of times people never talk to customers or hear from them. And
Yeah.
that's like
True.
you run into a really risky scenario there where, you might be just polluting and giving these horrible experiences. Maybe it's a bad product experience, a bad buying experience, a bad website experience, like whatever it is, bad support experience. But, you have to have these feedback loops so people can, everyone in the company can see and feel what the customers are going through.
Actually, it's a good way because it also gives recognition to the team handling a customer. I think it's bridging the gap between that recognition that an employee also wants on how good a job they're doing and how they're improving the product or the solution, right? And also gives a lot of leverage to, take in a feedback from an advocate, get to know exactly what they want. And I think a lot of that exposure gave me a quick insight of how important a customer is and how important, getting now the reviews and references and how they truly matter into shaping a company's output, outcome, everything.
Yeah, and I think, just to parlay on that, for me, reviews and references, those are outputs. The
Yeah.
outputs that happen when you give good inputs, which are good experiences. When people have great experiences, they're naturally going to talk more about you. They're going to want to help you out. And I think a lot of times what I've observed, and so my current role, I advise a lot of other SaaS and AI startups. I serve as an advisor. I did the SaaS CMO Pro thing where it's like a big YouTube channel. You can go and watch me wax on poetically about whatever marketing or success topic you see. But what I consistently see when I talk to a lot of these startups is that I think they over-oriented on short-term metrics. Short-term metrics to me are things like leads or even
Yeah.
closed business. It incentivizes very short-term thinking, where I think like customer experience metrics like CSAT, you said the excellent one on, on a support resolution, your net promoter score. There's a whole bunch of good experience metrics
Correct.
out there. For me, that incentivizes long-term behavior. It incentivizes a better experience so people go recommend. So the company grows faster in the long run, not just like next week, how are we doing, but how are we doing, for the full
For the
fiscal
bigger
year, for
picture.
the next year.
Yeah.
Yeah, the bigger picture. And so like I consistently see that where a lot of times, like in my eyes, metrics drive people, right? And so if you give a short-term metric to a team, they're going to focus on it, right? They're just trying to do their job. So I think like we have to be really careful with the metrics we choose and try to balance out these short-term metrics with these longer-term customer experience type metrics.
You're right, actually. You're talking about metrics. I want to add one more thing to it. So I'm going to get a little geeky about it. So I once worked where I was given 14 marketing tools, right? 3 CRMs, different ConnectWise and what have you, very dated stuff. And zero shared dashboards and efforts
Yeah.
and all. So we were like, 5 pilots flying a plane in different directions. No one had a clue what we were doing. And we would all keep saying, oh, we are doing brilliant. We are acing it. And everyone's dashboard was all green and colorful and everything of that sort. But our KPIs together on one platform were, I would say, atrocious. A lot of times I've seen that, technology, you can have metrics, you can have a lot of things assigned to you, you can have your KPIs, but technology enables everything to come together, these functions. Are there any tools or integrations that have been your game changers? Like whichever, next CMO you are going to mentor, you would say, no, you have to have this.
I think the metrics and the tech are a little bit tied together. So I would say for any, CMOs, aspiring CMOs that are listening, right? Like the way I always thought about metrics was you have these funnel metrics, and we talked a little bit about that. These are your visitors, your leads, your pipe opportunities, closed business. And that's good. That's important, but that's like just one class of metrics. I think we talked about the experience-based metrics. I think are really important. Whether it's net promoter score, CSAT, that could be everything like how fast does your website load? How easy is it to start using your product? You have brand metrics like does anyone know about us? Aided recall, unaided recall. Hey, how do people feel about us? Sentiment. You can measure that stuff. And brands a little bit, you're starting to lean a little bit more into long-term type thinking, which I usually espouse. Or even have like product like growth type metrics, like how many, like that was big for us at Psych, like how many daily active users do we have? Not just did someone sign up, but are they actually using it? How many product qualified leads do we have? Not just did they fill out a form, but are they using the product, and are using the product at a high enough threshold where it makes sense now for someone from sales to talk to them? I think like just kind of thinking holistically about what are the right type of metrics is really important. To your question around like dashboards and tech, yeah, there's a lot of different tech out there, and you're right, you can get kind of drowned in it. The biggest thing I found is one, trying to align these teams to have more shared metrics. So even within marketing, what I've noticed is teams want to get siloed. The demand gen team doesn't talk to the customer marketing team, which doesn't talk to the product marketing team, which doesn't talk to the marketing ops team. So I always liked when I was running marketing, like having some of these teams or having all these teams share some core metrics together. Hey, we all win or lose. We're not going to all have totally different separate metrics, but we're going to share some metrics. Now, that could be a funnel metric like I talked about. That could be an experience metric. That could be a brand metric. But hey, let's choose that. And then like, hey, let's all have the same dashboard. Let's all go off of one thing. Let's not all have our own little separate ones. Everybody wants to look good. My team's doing great. Everything's great. No problems here. But, that's just not the reality. And I think you have to incentivize people to work together, and I think it comes from org alignment, from the right metrics, from the right tech that you're using. And, it's one virtuous loop. I also think just too, even having the right values is really important. I know, like, for instance, the Slack, we hired people intentionally, like people that had empathy. We had many questions that would try to tease out if they had empathy for the customer, because when someone, it's like if you walk with a pebble in your shoe, it's annoying. But if you walk every day with a pebble in your shoe, it gets really annoying, right? You have to
you'll be frustrated.
It's frustrating. You have to think about your customers. Now, that was regardless if they were in sales, if they were in finance and legal or marketing, right? Like having like customer empathy was a huge part. I don't think there's one thing that solves all of it, but I do think holistically, you have to think about all these things, org design, metrics, processes, culture, values, the right strategic vision and how you bring everyone together.
But Bill, tell me something. When you have so many people involved, right? You're talking about getting them together. They need to be empathetic. They need to be, vigilant of what is happening. They need to take care of, work as a team. They're very strong voices in that room as well. They're together. There would be sparks flying everywhere. There'll be a lot of opinions and talks that are happening around the room. And honestly, disagreements are bound to, happen. How do you manage that? Like, how do you manage conflict between a sales team, a demand generation, customer marketing, where, egos and pressure and quarterly goals are all together in one room?
Yeah. I think separate metrics, silo teams, like encourage divisiveness. They encourage teams to really like go after each other, blame each other, not want to work together. At Slack, we had shared metrics. Everyone was in charge of improving daily active users, from legal to product to marketing to sales. Everyone was in charge of improving the net promoter score, from success to, customer marketing to product sales, legal, everyone, right? And that manifested itself. You would see it, like legal rewrote the terms of service so that anyone could read it. And they changed it from like 30 pages to like a page that you could read. Procurement made it easier for people to work with us, new vendors. Product and marketing, we'd work together on the onboarding flow. Sales would think about like these, what were those first touch points? How do maybe we let them reach out to us, opposed to always like reaching out to them first.
Yeah.
And also, I think when you have shared metrics, you take on projects that you normally wouldn't or couldn't do in a siloed sense. Like we could do projects that required some engineering, some marketing, some creative, because like all these teams had the same metric. It wasn't like, oh, hey, I need some front end dev. Well, sorry, we're working on this. It was like, oh yeah, it's all the same goals. Let's work together to help each other out.
Yeah.
So I think that's important. I realize like in a lot of companies, you don't have that. And I would just say like, disagreements are going to happen. I think when you share the same values though, kind of getting back to that conversation, that helps. So I like Jeff Bezos with Amazon. He has a famous quote where a lot of times they'd have a meeting, and then at the end of the meeting, they would always leave one seat empty around the table, right? And at the end of the meeting, they would go like, hey, what would the customer that's, let's say they're sitting in that empty seat, what would they think of the decision we just made? Was it a customer centric decision? Like one thing, like when Bezos left, I could tell they were starting to lose some of their customer centricity, right? You would go on there and it would be like they're trying to sell you all this like add-on stuff like after you've bought it. Or once I had an issue, I was trying to return something and it took me like 40 hours. It was just like all this like stuff that I'm sure in a meeting where you were just like, hey, we can raise revenue by 2% if we do it this way. But like the customer didn't. So I think that's a long way of saying, like, I think if you've clearly articulated the mission and the values of the company, a lot of times when you have these disagreements, you can go back to it and go, okay, well, let's look at our mission again. Let's look at the core values of the company and which side more closely aligns with what we're trying to achieve here.
More like constructive chaos put together.
Yeah. And it's okay. Like, look, people are going to have different points of view, but I think if you can always, again, if you have a customer-centric company, and building a customer-centric company is really hard. You really have to put in the right people. And only that, I would say like B2B, one thing that also rankles me, I've been doing a certain playbook for the last 30 years. And I just think like, hey, like we can change and improve. The go-to-market should always be evolving. Like you wouldn't go, God, if you're in software, you wouldn't go, oh my God, we used this coding language 20 years ago. C++, like, let's use that everywhere now. You'd be like, what are you talking about? There's like so many more better like languages and coding and AI tools. Why would we use that? Well, same in go-to-market. Like, hey, just because we did this old model of like top-down sales, outbound, these teams are separated. They only have like these specific metrics. Like, that doesn't mean that, hey, there isn't a better way to do it. Yeah. And I think companies that recognize that are the ones that are going to grow the fastest.
That's a nice way to put it, because I wanted to ask, we've been talking about alignment, but what is that biggest myth that, about aligning these functions together? What's something that people really need to hear and probably have a very warped notion of aligning these teams?
I think probably the biggest myth is if you've created your mission and your values, or even what you're going to do this year, and you say it once, that everyone's going to know it. Right? Everyone's going to live by it. Like a lot of times I'll do a kickoff call with a company I'm advising. And one of the questions I'll ask sometimes is like, hey, write down the top 3 priorities of the company right now. Everybody just write them down on a piece of paper. Don't look at your neighbor. Put them in even stack rank order, and I'll kind of collect them. And you'll have like 39 different answers, completely different answers. And so I would just say from an alignment perspective, it's really hard. Like I remember Mark Benioff told me that once, where he would focus a lot of his time on bringing everyone together and just repeating again and again and again. Hey guys, here's the 5 things we're going to do this year. Here's our company values. Here's our mission. Because he was like, hey, everyone just kind of wants to go off and do their own thing. And, it's like herding 1,000 cats. You got to bring them all back together and make sure everyone's aligned. And that just takes a lot of effort and energy. And I do think like as leaders, that's a huge part of your job, is making sure everyone is aligned, everyone is living those values, everyone is, aligned to it. Like I remember it's like in our team meeting, we would always have an award for, at least my team, like, hey, who most lived our values for that week? Like, who is the one that had the most customer empathy, or who is the one that really, lived craftsmanship, or, we had our
Yeah.
like 5 or 6 different values there. I would always quiz people. They hated this in my team meetings, but I'd
Oh,
be
good
like,
Lord.
hey,
Yeah.
like what are the 6 values of Slack, right? Hey, what are the 4 most important things we're doing this year, right? Because I really want them to like know that and embed it. And because I think it's easy just for that document to be written up once. A lot of companies don't even have it, right? Even, hey, what are the top priorities for this year? That doesn't even
Yeah.
exist. But if it does, like, hey, let's understand it and live it and align towards it. So that's what I'd say is the
True.
biggest myth, is that everyone is aligned. Like, I don't see that happen.
I think, yeah, in the current company that I'm in, yes, that happens. And I think 100% I've noticed that, your culture really shapes what the processes look like. If you don't have the right culture, irrespective of what policies you're creating and what leadership is, preaching, it really doesn't go the right way. I think also joint wins, like celebrating those joint wins,
Yeah.
because collectively, like your sales, your customer marketing, they must be doing at least 1% of effort somewhere that's actually making a customer happy, bringing them more sales. How do you feel that, culture in every company sets the right tone, and like leaders set the right tone by promoting that culture? I know you've spoken very highly about it, but is it in other companies also, other than Slack, that you saw it?
Yeah, I think the culture that a company chooses is hugely important. The values they choose, the mission they choose, the types of people they hire, the customer centricness of them, and do they believe in that style, right? Like, if you want to be a customer centric company, and you're not screening that as part of your hiring
Yeah.
process, how are you going to achieve it? How do you change the culture to really align around this customer centric, and how are the leaders doing it? How are the individuals doing it? How do we cross communicate, share metrics? It's hard. It's a really hard thing to do. And I think that's why a lot of companies, you don't see it, because
They struggle. Yeah.
yeah, it just requires a ton of cycles, and it requires a lot of people to be on the same page.
So I know you've given a lot of advice here already, because someone who's
It's what I
listening
do. I'm an
in,
advisor, a full-time advice all day, every day.
because someone who's listening in, each answer that you're giving in, you are adding that, nugget of wisdom there, that, okay, pick on this, learn from this. I would say that, if you had to give, let's say, a startup or an established organization who are struggling with this alignment, how is it that you tell them that this is your funda to get that particular growth in?
Yeah, I think a lot of it's just kind of, a lot of times companies will mainly reach out to me as like, hey, they want to grow faster. They want to get their growth from 30% to 100%, or 100% to 500%. Right. And I think a lot of that comes from, more modern playbooks we talked about, more customer centric playbooks, more alignment. Right. But like, I'm in a fortunate position where I think when they've reached out to me, they'll look to kind of a domain expert and like, hey, here's what we need to do. But alignment is hard. I will say, like, a really practical example that I thought helped me out a ton. It was one of the best things I worked at when I was at Salesforce. They used a system called the V2 MOM. So the letter V, then the number 2, then MOM. And it's kind of a similar, a little offshoot of like an OKR, objective key results, that Google did. But the idea was that we would, at the beginning of the year, say, like, Mark would say, hey, here are the top 5 or 10 goals of the company. Here's our core values. Here's our mission. Here's the metrics we're going to do to track them. And he would make that document public. And then after that, it would waterfall down. So every person underneath him had to make their own V2
Their
MOM.
own thing.
And it was, anyone could see anyone's V2 MOM at all times. In Salesforce, a lot of times, if you would ask, like, randomly, hey, what's your top goal, or what's the goal of the company? Like, people would know, because that just was like, really, yeah, it wasn't like all these little siloed teams that no one knew what anyone was doing. It was pretty easy to find out like what someone was working on. And I think it's actually one of the reasons Salesforce acquired Slack. It was kind of cool to see my former company buy a new company. Part of it is like Slack was, and I always talk about Stuart this in the beginning of the days, it like changed the company from like everything's opaque in email to everything is like transparent, like open in channels. And even it was really interesting because we'd work with a lot of companies, and sometimes we go like help them out, and you go into their Slack instance and almost all the channels would be private. And it was kind of like, that's actually not kind of like the original intent was to like, expose this meritocracy, anyone can have access to the information. You can see what anyone's up to or what they're working on. But yeah, there's definitely human behavior to, I think, kind of want to close in, make it private, not share that details. And to the extent I think you can be more, transparent, the extent that you can share these values, align around them, use different tech, that's all going to help you out.
Wonderful. I think, when I started this podcast, one, I was a little nervous. I told you also before it started that I'm a little nervous.
All good.
But I think in these couple of questions that we've, shared and interacted on, I think it's more or less like a short masterclass on how someone needs to bring in that alignment, be it a startup, be it a full-fledged organization, been there for years. You've in the shortest time, Bill, I think you've given us strategy, you've given us soul, and yes, a whole lot of aha moments also. What is that one thing that you would say that, within just these three teams, they need to have a little faith on, let's say, X?
Yeah.
What would it be?
Yeah. I would probably say for me is just my personal philosophy and belief is lean into the customer. Really think about hey, how your team is impacting that customer journey, that experience. And is it a positive experience? Are you doing things that people like? Or are you doing things that people hate? Are you hiding all your pricing? Are you putting everything behind forms? Are you annoying people? Are you emailing them too much, right? Delivering helpful education and nurturing them and educating them throughout their entire journey. I think we can all do good marketing, bad marketing, good sales, bad sales. And I would just think about that end point because those little differences really make a huge impact in the long run. It's all these little micro experiences that people lead to either loving your company and telling it to 10 other people or the inverse. I hate this company, never use them, right? And we've all had this when we just talked to our coworkers. Oh, I love this company. Oh, they suck. Don't use them, right? That has a huge, huge impact on a company's long-term prospects and their growth.
I think this is a wonderful way to actually wrap up our podcast. And once again, I really want to thank you for being so patient with me and so nice to me. And yes, it's just for everyone tuning in. I do want to mention that, growth doesn't come from louder campaigns or bigger budgets. I think it comes with a lot of heart and having the right perspective towards shared obsessions towards a customer. If I would want to conclude this.
No, I love that. Look, if you become customer obsessed, good things are going to happen. I think I've always believed that. Marketing budgets, campaigns, all that stuff, they have their place. But if you're just looking at hey, what's the fastest way to grow a company? What's also the most capital efficient way to grow a company? I think becoming customer obsessed at every position, every level in the company is the surest fire way to achieve it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thanks again for having me. I love the conversation, Aparna.
If you found today's tea piping hot, don't forget to stir the pot. Share it, rate it, and bring a friend to the table. Until next time, keep turning loyalty into leverage with me, Aparna, and the Loyalty Talks podcast.